Welcome to Terrifying Exorcism. Tonight, we uncover one of the scariest and most disturbing possession cases ever recorded. The story of Michael Taylor in the UK, 1974. A case where priests claimed to pull 40 demons from a man's body, but one refused to leave. This is not a story of fantasy or fiction. What you're about to hear is based on real testimony, hidden records, and the chilling words of a father who lived through the exorcism. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. What time is it where you are right now, and where in the world are you watching from? I have never been one to chase superstition, but this case reached me in a way I could not ignore. I am a reporter, and though my profession demands objectivity, sometimes what I encounter unsettles that foundation. I first heard whispers of it while digging through local archives, and then from the lips of a priest who agreed to speak with me after years of silence. His name was Father Peter Lawrence, and he carried the weight of what he had witnessed as if it had never left the room where it happened. The case he recounted was one of the darkest in modern memory. It revolved around a man named Michael Taylor from the quiet market town of Ossett in West Yorkshire. On the surface, Michael was ordinary. In his early 30s, a husband, a father, and by most accounts gentle, though troubled. The town knew him as a man who struggled with depression and bouts of guilt, but nothing that suggested what would later emerge. His family described him as kind-hearted but increasingly distant, as though shadows followed him even in daylight. Father Lawrence did not meet Michael until the disturbances had already taken hold. By then, the situation had spiraled beyond what doctors could rationalize. The symptoms began subtly, with mood swings that edged toward the unnatural. Michael spoke in fragmented tones, often muttering to himself in ways his wife could not decipher. At night, his voice changed. His children recalled hearing him speak in tongues no one in the house recognized, though he had never studied a language beyond English. The first attempts to seek help were medical. Physicians examined Michael, suspecting exhaustion, a neurological disorder, or perhaps schizophrenia. Treatments were prescribed, but the episodes only grew worse. What unsettled the family most was not the anger or the depression, but the sudden moments when Michael's face seemed to contort with expressions that were not his own, fleeting, grotesque distortions that left his wife clutching the children in fear. Father Lawrence told me that the church itself hesitated before intervening. In the early 1970s, exorcisms were regarded with suspicion, often criticized as relics of the past. Many in the clergy feared ridicule, and the community pressured them to stay silent. Yet, as the reports mounted and the family's desperation deepened, the case could not be ignored. When Father Lawrence first visited the Taylor home, he described the atmosphere as suffocating. The curtains were drawn, though it was midday, and the air was thick, stale, as if the house had not been opened in weeks. Michael sat in a chair near the fireplace, slouched but alert, eyes darting like a hunted animal. "It was not madness I saw in him," Lawrence said. "It was something else, a hostility that did not belong to him." The early signs became more violent. Objects fell from shelves without explanation. Michael's temper flared into sudden rages, followed by sobbing fits where he begged forgiveness for words he did not remember speaking. At one point, he accused his wife of harboring evil inside her, screaming at her in the dead of night until the neighbors knocked on the door. And yet the next morning, he would weep and beg for mercy, bewildered at the accusations. Doctors dismissed these incidents as psychiatric, but Father Lawrence told me that he had seen this pattern before in the accounts of his mentor, a senior priest who had confronted possession decades earlier. The resemblance was chilling. The turning point came when Michael attacked his own reflection. His wife recounted walking into the bathroom to find the mirror shattered, his hands bloodied, shouting that the face in the glass was mocking him. When pressed, Michael swore it was not his reflection he had seen, but something older, crueler, staring back at him with a smile. By now, the family was divided. Some clung to medical explanations, pleading with doctors for stronger treatments. Others whispered that only the church could intervene. In a town where religion and skepticism lived uneasily side by side, this conflict deepened the stigma. Rumors spread quickly, and the Taylors found themselves isolated. It was in this climate of fear and doubt that Father Lawrence agreed to conduct an assessment. He met Michael alone in the parish hall one evening. Lawrence recalled the silence between them was so heavy it was difficult to speak. When he finally prayed aloud, Michael's body stiffened and for a brief moment his voice changed. "Not his voice," Lawrence said firmly, "but a guttural sound, something I cannot reproduce." It mocked the prayers, repeating them backwards. This first encounter convinced Lawrence that the case was genuine, though he wrestled with hesitation. Exorcism was not undertaken lightly. It required approval, preparation, and the full acknowledgement of the church hierarchy. Yet Michael's state was deteriorating rapidly, and the family begged for help. As the months wore on, Michael's condition reached its most frightening stage. He claimed to see figures in the corners of rooms, shadows that whispered obscenities, promising him freedom if he surrendered. His wife, terrified, confided to Lawrence that sometimes during the night, Michael's body would lift slightly from the bed, his chest heaving with unnatural force. The family's desperation grew into panic. The children were sent to stay with relatives. Neighbors reported screams at night, and sometimes the sound of animal growls that seemed to come from no human throat. Doctors, overwhelmed and unable to provide relief, eventually stepped aside, unwilling to claim progress. It was then, Father Lawrence told me, that the church relented. Permission was granted for the rite of exorcism. The preparations were discreet, carried out in secrecy to avoid the press or public interference. But Lawrence admitted something that unsettled me more than anything else. He said, "We did not know what we were facing," he whispered. "We thought it would be one spirit, one torment. We were wrong." The first night of the ritual, the air was thick with tension. Rosaries clutched tight, candles flickering, prayers whispered under breath. Michael was brought into the room restrained, his eyes wild yet empty, as though he were watching from far away. Father Lawrence leaned forward as he told me the next part, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said there were many inside him, and when they began to answer, we counted them. Not one, not two, but dozens, each with its own voice, each with its own mockery. 40 in total. And yet—" He stopped, looking past me into the distance, as though the memory had pulled him back. Even when the last of them fell silent, I knew something had stayed behind, something we never named. The candlelight wavered against the stone walls of the parish hall, each flame shrinking and stretching, as though it too feared what was unfolding. Father Peter Lawrence sat across from Michael Taylor, his breviary open but trembling in his hands. The other priests present, Father John Renshaw and Father William Harris, exchanged nervous glances. Though the church had sanctioned the rite, no one had prepared them for what would answer back. Father Lawrence had told me his voice broke more than once during those first hours. "You must understand," he said, "when one expects resistance, one anticipates the cries of torment, even blasphemy. But what poured from Michael was not only resistance, it was an orchestration of voices, each distinct, each venomous." Michael's head snapped back, his eyes rolling so far into his skull that only the whites showed. His mouth twisted unnaturally wide, and the first voice emerged, deep, gravelly, nothing like the man's own tone. It named itself as hatred, and its laughter filled the chamber with a resonance that made the others recoil. Then another followed, and another. By the hour's end, the priests had counted 40. Some shrieked like children, others whispered in languages none of the men recognized. A few mocked scripture with chilling precision, reciting passages backwards or twisting holy words into curses. "I felt," Lawrence confessed to me, "as if we were not expelling intruders from one man, but dismantling a fortress of evil brick by brick." The process was relentless. The priests alternated prayers, sometimes losing their voices from shouting over the shrieks. Michael's body convulsed violently, the ropes restraining his wrists biting deep into his skin. At times he fell limp, as though unconscious, only for another voice to emerge moments later, each claiming dominion over a different fragment of him. Witnesses in the room, a doctor, present to ensure Michael did not suffer fatal physical harm, and a few trusted members of the parish, later attested to what they saw. One described the atmosphere as unbearable, heavy with a stench of rot that seemed to seep from Michael himself. Another swore she saw shapes moving in the shadows of the room, flickering too quickly to follow. though no door or window was open. And yet, after hours of prayer, there was silence. One by one, the voices grew weak, fading like echoes retreating down a long corridor. When Michael's body finally sagged against the chair, drenched in sweat, his breathing shallow but steady, the priests felt relief surge through them. Father Harris wept openly, whispering gratitude that the ordeal had ended. But Father Lawrence, his voice grew quiet when he told me this, felt no relief. "There was something left," he said. "I could not prove it, but I sensed it. A silence too heavy, a stillness that did not belong to peace. It was as though one of them had stayed behind, waiting." Michael was returned to his home, where his wife received him with trembling hands and tearful eyes. She thanked the priests, believing her husband free at last. For several days, he appeared calmer. The rages subsided, his speech returned to its natural cadence, and he slept without the terrors that had plagued him for months. The children were brought home, and for the first time in weeks, the Taylors sat together at their table. But beneath this fragile calm, cracks began to show. Michael grew withdrawn, his gaze lingering too long on empty corners. At church, he hesitated to kneel, his eyes fixed on the crucifix as though studying it with unease. When asked about his health, he smiled faintly, but gave no clear answer. His wife later admitted to Father Lawrence that at night she woke to find him standing by the window, unmoving, staring into the dark fields beyond the garden. When she asked what he saw, he simply said, "It's waiting." The church, cautious of public scrutiny, considered the exorcism concluded. Officially, Michael was declared delivered. Yet Lawrence pressed for continued observation. He visited the family weekly, each time noting the subtle erosion of the man's spirit. The worst moment, he recalled, came when Michael refused communion. His hand trembled above the chalice, then recoiled violently as though burned, his face tightening into a grimace he quickly masked with a weak smile. The priests debated among themselves whether a second ritual was warranted. Some argued exhaustion had blinded them, that all 40 spirits had indeed been cast out. Others admitted unease, but feared the ridicule of pressing the church for another sanction so soon. It was decided they would wait, watch, and pray. It was during this waiting that the first signs of relapse appeared. Michael's wife reported sudden bursts of anger, followed by memory gaps. He accused her once more of consorting with evil, though he later swore he had no recollection of saying such things. His children overheard him muttering again, though the words seemed more deliberate this time, not the frantic outbursts of before. When Father Lawrence confronted him, Michael wept bitterly, insisting he did not wish to fall back into darkness. But as Lawrence recited a prayer over him, a flicker passed across Michael's features, a tightening of the mouth, a narrowing of the eyes, too quick to capture, yet chilling. The priest told me he began to dream of Michael at night. He would see the man standing in silence, his lips moving though no sound emerged. In one dream, Michael raised a finger to his lips, warning him to stay quiet, as if the secret of what lingered must never be spoken aloud. Lawrence confessed these dreams troubled him deeply. "It was not simply my imagination," he said. "It was as though the presence itself had reached into my sleep, a warning or a threat." By autumn of that year, the tension within the town had grown unbearable. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed Michael had been cured by the hand of God. Others whispered that the devil still held him. Families crossed the street to avoid the Taylors. Shopkeepers grew hesitant to serve them. The stigma pressed heavily on the family, isolating them further. Michael, already fragile, seemed to retreat into himself. He no longer attended work. He no longer walked to the market with his wife. His world shrank to the boundaries of his home, where silence became his companion. And yet, the silence was not empty. His wife told Father Lawrence that she often heard him speaking alone in the cellar, where he would sit for hours in the dark. Once she crept close enough to hear. His voice was calm, steady, unlike his frenzied outbursts before. He spoke as if in conversation, pausing as though listening to a reply. She dared not step inside, fearing what she might hear more clearly. The priest grew desperate. He pressed the church again for permission to act, warning them that something remained unfinished. His request was delayed, reviewed, and met with hesitancy. The hierarchy wanted assurance, evidence that another exorcism was truly warranted. But how could one provide evidence of silence, of shadows, of unseen whispers? And then came the night that broke the fragile calm. It was bitterly cold when the neighbors heard the screams. They rushed to the tailor's home where the windows glowed faintly with firelight. Inside, they found Michael's wife weeping, clutching the children, while Michael himself stood rigid in the middle of the room. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his eyes burned with a strange clarity. "I told you," he said quietly. "It never left." Father Lawrence told me that when he arrived, summoned in haste, he knew at once what had happened. The one that had remained hidden among the expelled 40 had now revealed itself. Not through violence or theatrics, but through quiet possession, the kind that waits, patient, until belief wavers and despair takes root. And it was only then that Lawrence began to understand. What they had faced was not merely multiplicity, but hierarchy. The lesser voices had fled, leaving behind the strongest, the one that refused to go. Father Peter Lawrence told me he had never seen silence weaponized in such a way. When he entered the tailor's home that night, Michael stood motionless at the center of the living room, his chest rising and falling with deliberate rhythm, his eyes fixed on the priest as though he had been expecting him. The rest of the family was huddled in the corner, his wife trembling, the children clinging to her, neighbors whispering prayers under their breath. "I knew at once," Lawrence said. This was not 40 voices clamoring for dominance. This was one voice waiting for its moment. He approached slowly, breviary in hand. "Michael," he called, but the man did not answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though listening to something that no one else could hear. Only when Lawrence began to recite the opening of the Gospel of John did Michael stir. His lips curled into a faint smile, and in a voice calm, almost conversational, he spoke, "Not gone, never gone, only watching." The simplicity of it chilled everyone in the room. It was not the guttural, mocking tone of the earlier demons. It was controlled, deliberate, like a man who knew exactly what he was saying. Father Lawrence tried to continue, but his voice faltered. He confessed to me that in that moment, for the first time in his priesthood, he feared his words carried no weight. Michael did not rage or thrash. Instead, he sat down in the chair by the hearth and folded his hands neatly in his lap. He looked, as one witness described, like a man waiting for company. When Lawrence pressed him with prayers, Michael responded with fragments of scripture, but altered, twisted just slightly to invert their meaning. Neighbors backed away in fear, and Michael's wife begged the priest to intervene fully. But Lawrence knew the church had not sanctioned another rite, and acting without approval risked not only his position, but also Michael's life. Still, he began to pray, and it was then that Michael leaned forward and said softly, "Do you think the others were anything more than a distraction? They were the smoke. I am the fire." The following days were filled with dread. Michael slipped between moments of clarity and something darker, as though two versions of him shared the same body, but no longer fought openly for control. He went about his tasks in silence, but always with an edge of detachment. His children avoided his gaze, saying it frightened them. His wife confessed to Lawrence that sometimes at night Michael lay awake beside her, whispering names into the dark, names she did not recognize. Doctors were once again summoned, but their examinations found nothing new. Exhaustion, perhaps, stress, a lingering psychological break from the trauma of the exorcism. They urged rest, medication, patience, but no treatment could explain why the dog refused to enter the same room as him, growling low whenever Michael sat still in silence. The stigma in Ossett worsened. The townsfolk whispered of the failed exorcism, of the evil that lingered. The tailors became increasingly isolated. Shopkeepers turned away from them. School children mocked the tailor children, calling their father the devil's mouth. Michael withdrew deeper into the house, and his wife began locking the doors at night, not to keep intruders out, but to keep something in. Father Lawrence told me his own faith was tested during this time. He struggled with doubts he had never confessed to anyone before. He wondered whether they had erred in the first exorcism, whether in their zeal to count and expel, They had overlooked the most dangerous presence. He read through his old notes, consulted his mentor's writings, even corresponded quietly with priests in other dioceses. None could offer clear guidance. All he received were warnings: tread carefully, wait for the church's decision. But waiting was becoming unbearable. One evening, Lawrence visited Michael alone. The house was dim, the curtains drawn, the air heavy with the smell of damp wood. He found Michael in the cellar, sitting on a stool, a candle burning faintly beside him. The walls were marked with scratches, not drawings, not words, just lines upon lines, as though he had dragged his fingernails along the stone in some absent ritual. When Lawrence asked him what he was doing, Michael looked up slowly and said, "Counting." "Counting what?" Lawrence pressed. "Not days, not sins. Steps." The priest admitted he did not understand. But when he tried to lead Michael back upstairs, the man resisted, clutching the stool with white knuckles. "If I leave, it leaves with me," he whispered. "Down here, it whispers softer." Lawrence left that night deeply unsettled. He began to wonder if the church's caution was not only insufficient but dangerous. He wrote again to his superiors, this time warning that the presence was not dormant but preparing. "It waits for despair," he wrote, "and the family is nearly there." As autumn turned to winter, the manifestations grew sharper. Objects did not simply fall, they shattered. Doors slammed with such force that hinges split. The children awoke screaming, claiming they saw someone standing at the foot of their beds, though the figure dissolved when light was struck. And always, Michael remained strangely calm, as if observing rather than participating. The breaking point came during a Sunday service. Michael attended with his family, sitting stiffly in the pew. When the congregation rose to recite the Nicene Creed, he remained seated, his lips moving in silence. Father Lawrence, standing at the altar, noticed his eyes fixed directly upon him, and then, with deliberate clarity, Michael recited the Creed aloud, but backwards. The congregation froze. The sound was unmistakable, each word reversed, each phrase twisted, yet spoken with perfect cadence. Murmurs filled the church, some parishioners crossing themselves, others fleeing in terror. Lawrence himself faltered, his voice dying mid-verse. Michael fell silent when the last word ended. He stood, bowed mockingly toward the altar, and walked out of the church with his family trailing helplessly behind. It was the final proof the church required. Lawrence's superiors, shaken by the testimony of dozens of witnesses, authorized a second exorcism. Preparations began at once, but Father Lawrence admitted something that struck me deeply. "We no longer faced 40 voices clamoring for recognition," he said. "We faced one, hidden, patient, deliberate. And I feared it would not fight us with screams or thrashing. I feared it would fight us with silence." The second exorcism was scheduled for the following week. This time, precautions were greater, more priests, stricter fasting, longer prayers of preparation. A doctor was again enlisted. The secrecy was tighter, but by now rumors had already spread. The town buzzed with anticipation and dread. Some believed salvation was at hand, others whispered that it would fail, and the failure would bring ruin not just on Michael, but on everyone who dared to intervene. On the eve of the ritual, Father Lawrence visited the Taylors once more. He found Michael standing by the window watching the darkened fields. When the priest asked him what he saw, Michael turned slowly and said, "Do you know how long I've been here? Longer than him, longer than his father, longer than any of you. I don't leave. I only wait." Lawrence tried to pray, but his voice shook. Michael only smiled faintly and whispered, "You'll see." The priest told me he left the house that night with his heart pounding, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold his rosary. He did not sleep. None of them did. And when dawn broke, the second exorcism began. The parish hall had been chosen once again, though this time it was fortified with greater care. Heavy drapes covered the windows, the crucifix was polished and fixed firmly on the wall, and every corner was blessed with holy water. Candles stood in clusters around the room, their wax dripping steadily in the chill air. A table was prepared with the necessary texts, relics, and oil. The priests had fasted for 3 days. None spoke as they entered, for words seemed brittle in the face of what they knew awaited them. Michael was brought in just after sunrise. His wife accompanied him, though she was quickly guided outside by parish members who feared her presence might weaken the resolve of the rite. Michael did not resist the restraints this time. He walked calmly, even willingly, into the room and sat down in the chair prepared for him. His eyes moved across each priest, studying them with detached amusement, as though this were a spectacle arranged for his benefit. Father Peter Lawrence recalled that the stillness unnerved them more than any outburst could have. It was not the fury of possession, he said. It was the patience of something that believed it could not be defeated. The rite began with the litany of the saints. The voices of the priests rose together, solemn, steady, echoing off the walls. Michael sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the crucifix. His breathing was even, almost meditative. Minutes passed, then an hour, nothing. The doctor shifted uneasily, scribbling notes that betrayed both boredom and skepticism. Parish members exchanged nervous glances. Was this another false alarm? Had the church been deceived by fear and rumor? And then Michael laughed. It was not loud, not hysterical, just a quiet, deliberate chuckle that cut through the prayers like a blade. He leaned forward against his restraints, his smile faint but sharp. "You've made it worse for yourselves," he whispered. "Now it knows you're afraid." The priests pressed on, their voices trembling. Lawrence described the sensation as though the room itself had tilted. The air grew heavy, difficult to breathe. Candles flickered violently, though no draught stirred the hall. Michael's body stiffened, his muscles taut, and his eyes rolled upward until only the whites remained. The voice that emerged was not like the others. It was low, measured, and chillingly articulate. "The rest are gone," it said. "They were children. I am not." The priests responded with the Roman ritual, invoking Christ's authority over all unclean spirits. Michael convulsed, but not violently. Instead, his movements were slow, deliberate, as if controlled by an unseen hand. His head turned inch by inch, until his gaze rested once more on Father Lawrence. "You knew I stayed," it said. "Why didn't you tell them?" Lawrence admitted to me that his hands shook so badly in that moment he nearly dropped the book. He pressed on, reciting prayers with renewed urgency. But the voice only grew calmer, almost conversational. They wanted victory. They counted their triumphs. 40 voices gone. They forgot the one that mattered. The exorcism stretched into hours. Michael's body did not thrash as before. Instead, he sat rigid, occasionally whispering words no one recognized. The priest closest to him swore he heard fragments of ancient names, not Latin, not Greek, but something older, syllables that seemed to gnaw at the air itself. At one point, Michael's lips moved without sound, and every candle in the room extinguished at once. Darkness fell, broken only by the pale glow of the crucifix. A chill swept through the hall, so sharp that even the doctor admitted his breath fogged in the air. The candles were relit, prayers redoubled, but the memory of that sudden void lingered like frost. Father Harris, one of the assisting priests, later confessed he nearly abandoned the rite. "It wasn't rage that frightened me," he told Lawrence. "It was composure. Whatever this was, it wasn't struggling. It was showing us that it could wait longer than we could pray." By evening, the priests were exhausted. Their voices cracked, their throats raw. Yet Michael remained restrained, his body trembling but not broken. Lawrence noticed that his skin had grown pale, his veins darkened as though bruised from within. The doctor urged rest, fearing cardiac failure, but Lawrence refused to stop. "If we break now," he said, "we will never regain control." And so they pressed on. The climax came in the small hours of the morning. Michael suddenly screamed, a sound so piercing it shattered the silence like glass. His body contorted, muscles straining against the restraints until the chair itself creaked. The scream shifted, splitting into layers. Not many voices, as before, but 2. One the familiar tone of Michael, the other deeper, resonant mocking. The priests seized upon the moment, shouting prayers with what strength they had left. Holy water was sprinkled, relics pressed against his skin. Michael's body convulsed violently now, thrashing against the ropes, his eyes darting wildly. And then abruptly silence. Michael slumped forward, his body limp, his breathing shallow but steady. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he looked at Father Lawrence with clarity. "It's gone," he whispered hoarsely. "You did it." Relief washed over the room. The priests collapsed into chairs, murmuring prayers of thanksgiving. The doctor confirmed his pulse, steady if weak. Parish members wept, praising God. But Father Lawrence did not rejoice. He told me that when he looked into Michael's eyes, he saw something he could not name. Not relief, not peace, but a flicker of something else. Something buried. Michael was released from his restraints and carried home. His wife embraced him, sobbing with gratitude. For days afterward, the family reported calm. Michael ate, slept, and spoke gently. The town began to whisper that perhaps the nightmare had finally ended. Yet Lawrence remained unsettled. He dreamed again, and in his dream, Michael stood at the altar, smiling faintly. "You should have asked its name," the dream figure whispered. "You never asked its name." The priest woke, drenched in sweat, his rosary clutched so tightly in his hand that the beads left marks in his skin. In the weeks that followed, small signs returned. A shadow where no one stood. A faint whisper in the cellar. Michael sometimes paused mid-sentence, his gaze distant as if listening. His wife admitted her unease to Lawrence. "He's kind," she said, "gentle even. But sometimes I feel I'm speaking to someone else, someone waiting behind his smile." The church declared the case resolved. The records were closed. But Father Lawrence never accepted it. He carried the memory with him for years, and when he told me his story, his hands still trembled. "They pulled 40 voices from him," he said, his voice breaking. "But one stayed behind. I knew it then, and I know it now. The silence was its victory." The night after Father Peter finally agreed to return to the Taylor home, I could not sleep. His words lingered with me long after I left the rectory. The image of a man dissolving into convulsions at the touch of a cross, the guttural voice that had once whispered in an otherwise quiet room. I had listened to countless strange tales in my work, but this one carried a different weight. There was no trace of embellishment in Father Peter's voice, no attempt to dress the account in drama. If anything, he seemed reluctant to share as much as he had. When I arrived at their modest home the next morning, the street was hushed. Neighbors eyed me from behind lace curtains, pulling back before I could return their gaze. By then, whispers had already spread around Osset. Some said Michael had taken to howling in the night. Others insisted he was violent. Rumors fed on themselves until the Taylor's home became a point of fascination and fear. Christine Taylor greeted me at the door. She was pale, her eyes sunken from nights of lost sleep. Her smile was brittle, polite, as though she had exhausted every polite gesture left in her body. "Come in," she said quietly, almost like a plea. The living room was dim despite the daylight. Curtains were half drawn, the air heavy and stale. Michael sat on the sofa, staring at the carpet as though it concealed a secret only he could see. His lips moved in silent mutterings, too faint for me to discern. A small wooden crucifix rested on the mantelpiece, turned slightly askew, as though someone had tried to remove it, but failed. Father Peter was already there, seated opposite Michael. He looked more tired than when I had last seen him, though his presence carried a certain steadiness. He nodded at me before returning his attention to the man before him. "Michael," Father Peter said gently, "do you know why I'm here again?" Michael raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot, but beneath the exhaustion was something else, an intensity, sharp and unrelenting. "To test me," Michael said. His voice cracked, but it carried a strange calmness. "You think you can trick me, but I know what you are." Christine flinched, but Father Peter remained composed. "And what do you believe I am?" Michael leaned forward, his lips curling into something that was neither a smile nor a sneer. "A man trying to fight what has already won." The silence that followed pressed into the walls. I felt it in my chest. an unwelcome weight that made the act of breathing difficult. Father Peter lifted a small vial from his pocket and uncorked it. The faint scent of oil drifted into the air. He made the sign of the cross, dipping his thumb before reaching toward Michael's forehead. The reaction was instant. Michael lurched back violently, his head striking the wall with a dull thud. His eyes rolled, and from his throat came a sound that did not belong to any living man I had ever heard. It was low, layered, as if several voices spoke at once but could not decide who would lead. Christine clasped her hands over her mouth. Her body shook as she stifled a cry. "Stop!" Michael's mouth growled, though it was not Michael's voice. "He is mine." Father Peter's hand trembled for the first time since I had met him, but he pressed forward, touching the oil to Michael's forehead. The man writhed, his body arching upward in an unnatural convulsion before collapsing back into the cushions. The smell of something acrid filled the room, burnt hair or rubber, I could not be sure. My stomach tightened. When Michael opened his eyes again, the clarity was gone. He stared through Father Peter as though seeing something far beyond him. Then suddenly he began to weep. "I don't want this," he sobbed. His words tumbled out frantic. "Please, I never asked for this. I don't want it inside me." Christine rushed to his side, gripping his hand, though his fingers clawed at hers as if he could not distinguish her touch from something else. Father Peter set the vial down, his face grave. "This has gone too far. It can no longer be ignored. The church must be informed." Those words seemed to terrify Christine even more than what had just transpired. Her head snapped toward him, her expression tight with desperation. "No. If they know, if the neighbors find out, they'll never forgive us. Michael will never live this down." "Christine," Father Peter said softly but firmly, "if this continues, your husband will not survive, nor will you. The matter is no longer yours alone to bear." I left their home that afternoon with the image of Michael's trembling form seared into my mind. His cries had not been those of a man putting on a display, nor even a man in the throes of madness. They were the cries of someone trapped, desperate for release, yet bound in ways no human hand could untie. Later that evening, I sat with Father Peter again. His expression was drawn, his features tight with an exhaustion he refused to name. He recounted other moments, things he had not spoken of in front of Christine. One night he had been called urgently after Michael had locked himself in the bathroom. Christine and their children had pounded on the door until, at last, Michael emerged with scratches across his chest and arms. His fingernails were bloodied as though he had clawed at himself with a force that defied reason. When asked why, Michael had simply muttered, "They don't want me clean." Another time, neighbors swore they had seen him wandering in the early hours, barefoot in the cold, muttering to himself in a language none recognized. Christine later confirmed he had returned home with mud caked on his legs and no memory of leaving the house. "He is deteriorating," Father Peter admitted, his voice low, "and with each passing night, it grows stronger." As he spoke, I could see the toll it was taking on him as well. The faint tremor in his hands, the dark rings beneath his eyes. This was no longer merely his duty as a priest. It had become something personal, an unseen battle waged not only for Michael's soul, but for his own endurance. When I asked if he had ever faced something like this before, he shook his head. "Never this many," he said, "never this fierce. If it continues, we may need to face the unthinkable." He did not explain what he meant by the unthinkable. Perhaps he could not. But the way his voice faltered told me enough. He feared where this path was leading, yet knew it could not be abandoned. That night, as I walked back to my lodging, I could not rid myself of the sound of Michael's layered voice, declaring victory already won. And for the first time since hearing the case, I began to wonder if Father Peter's fight was not only against something unseen, but against time itself. The first formal involvement of the church came only after weeks of mounting pressure. Father Peter had resisted at first, convinced he could manage Michael's condition with prayer and pastoral care. But after the night of the oil anointing, after hearing that layered voice echo through the small house, He realized his own strength was not enough. Still, he confessed to me that the decision weighed heavily on him. Calling in the church meant exposure, scrutiny, and the cold possibility of rejection. In his own words, if they did not believe me, the matter would be buried, and Michael along with it. He drafted a letter to his diocesan superior, careful in his language. He spoke of severe spiritual disturbance, of symptoms beyond pastoral aid. He avoided the word possession. He told me later it was deliberate. Bishops were wary of such claims, wary of priests who spoke too soon of devils and demons. The church, he reminded me, had spent centuries learning when to doubt its own eyes. While the letter traveled through official hands, life inside the Taylor home deteriorated further. Christine did her best to keep appearances. She still took the children to school each morning, though whispers followed her down the lane. At night, however, she no longer slept in the same bed as her husband. The bruises on her arms, she explained to Father Peter, came from Michael's fits, moments when he thrashed violently in his sleep, as though fighting invisible restraints. Father Peter shared with me another disturbing incident from that period. One afternoon, Christine found Michael in the backyard, kneeling in the soil. His hands were buried deep in the dirt, and he was muttering to himself, his lips covered in mud. When she tried to pull him inside, he screamed with such force that the neighbor came running. Michael's words were incoherent, a torrent of sounds that carried no structure, no grammar, just guttural syllables spilling out without pause. Christine admitted she feared he would harm the children. Not deliberately, she insisted, never deliberately, but in one of his episodes when he no longer seemed himself. The church finally responded. Father Peter received a curt note instructing him to document the events in greater detail. They asked for dates, times, witnesses. They wanted the words of Christine, of neighbors, of anyone who could verify the strangeness. I felt as though they were demanding evidence of a crime, Father Peter told me, and in a way they were. So he began collecting testimonies. He sat down with Christine, her voice faltering as she recounted her husband's nightly screams. He spoke with a neighbor who swore he had seen Michael standing under a street lamp at 3 a.m, staring up at the light with a grin that made the man retreat inside. He even visited a local doctor who had examined Michael weeks earlier but found nothing conclusive, only fatigue, stress, possible nervous exhaustion. The report grew thicker with each entry until Father Peter sent it off to the bishop with the weight of a man mailing a confession. While they waited for a response, the Taylors endured another night that Father Peter described to me in grim detail. He had been present that evening at Christine's urgent request. Michael had grown restless as darkness fell. He paced the small living room, muttering, occasionally snapping his head toward the corners, as if hearing whispers that eluded the rest. Christine tried to calm him with tea, but he shoved the cup away so hard that it shattered on the floor. Then, without warning, Michael's body stiffened. He clutched his chest, his face twisting as though under immense strain. From his throat poured a scream so raw, so inhuman, that Christine froze in place. Father Peter rushed to him, grasping his shoulders. He spoke prayers in Latin, steady and clear, though he admitted to me later that his heart raced. Michael's body convulsed violently, his head thrashing back and forth. His lips moved, but the words that came were not his own. They spoke in rhythms, clipped and harsh, syllables layered on top of one another. At last he collapsed. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Then, in a quiet, almost childlike voice, Michael whispered, "They will never let go." The silence that followed was suffocating. Christine sobbed, clutching her husband's limp hand. Father Peter sat beside them both, shaken by the shift in tone. The way that final whisper felt like a message from something not entirely human. It was after that night that he began preparing in earnest for the possibility of an exorcism. He did not speak the word openly, not to Christine, not to the neighbors, but I could hear it in his voice when he described the preparations. He gathered prayer books, blessed water, and relics he had not touched in years. Weeks later, the church's response arrived. It was not an approval, but neither was it a dismissal. They authorized a formal investigation to determine whether the matter merited an exorcism. When Father Peter told me this, I noticed the flicker in his eyes. Relief and dread tangled together. Relief that he was not alone, dread of what the investigation might uncover. The investigation would bring other priests, men trained to assess the validity of such cases. It would open the door to ritual, but only if they were convinced this was not madness, not illness, not deceit. As Father Peter put it, we were about to place Michael's suffering on trial. That trial was not far away. And as he told me the events that followed, the interviews, the hidden arguments, the desperate nights, I realized the church's involvement did not calm the storm. It deepened it. Because once the church steps into such matters, there is no quiet retreat. There is only the slow, steady march toward confrontation. The church investigators arrived in Osset on a bleak autumn morning, their presence as understated as their purpose was grave. 2 priests, dressed in plain black cassocks, stepped from a modest car and made their way up the Taylor's narrow lane. To the neighbors, they might have seemed like ordinary clerics visiting a parish family. But Christine, standing at the doorway, knew better. Father Peter introduced them simply as Father John Ashcroft and Father Leonard Doyle. Both men were older than Peter, their faces lined not only with age but with the weight of years spent confronting the inexplicable. They carried no airs of drama, no symbols of ritual, not yet, only notebooks and quiet eyes that missed nothing. The investigation began with questions. Christine was asked to recount every detail she could remember, the onset of Michael's disturbances, his words, his behaviors. She spoke hesitantly at first, ashamed, but soon the words tumbled out. She described the nights of screaming, the violent thrashing, the guttural voices. At times she faltered, breaking into sobs, but the priests waited patiently, recording each word with meticulous care. When they asked to speak with Michael, the house seemed to change. He had been upstairs, seated by the window, staring out at the grey clouds. When the priests entered the room, he did not move at first. Then, slowly, he turned toward them. His expression was strangely blank, but his eyes, red-rimmed, unblinking, lingered on each of their faces in turn. "Who are these?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Father Ashcroft answered calmly, "We are here to understand what troubles you, Michael." Michael's lips curled into something faintly mocking. "Understand? You don't understand. Not one of you understands." Then he laughed, short and sharp, like the bark of a dog. The investigators asked routine questions about his health, his sleep, his thoughts. At times, Michael responded with clarity, describing overwhelming fatigue, a sense of being followed inside his own body. But then his words would fracture into tangents, snatches of phrases in a language none of them recognized, muttered curses, or sudden silence as he glared at the crucifix Father Doyle held loosely in his hand. Christine stood by the door, wringing her hands. I could see her torn between the hope of relief and the dread of exposure. Every word her husband uttered became a stone laid upon her shoulders. Later, I spoke privately with Father Peter about their impressions. He told me Father Ashcroft had been cautious, noting that mental illness could not be ruled out. But Father Doyle had been shaken, convinced that no medical explanation could account for the voices or the violent reactions to religious symbols. It was during their second visit that the tension escalated. Michael had been calmer that day, seated in the living room with Christine. The priests gathered around him, asking him to pray with them. At first he complied, repeating the words of the Lord's Prayer in a low, strained voice. But when they reached "Deliver us from evil," his entire body stiffened. His voice broke into a guttural snarl, spitting the words back at them. The sound was so loud, so sudden, that Christine dropped the rosary she had been clutching. The priests pressed on, their voices rising in unison. Michael thrashed, his chair toppling backward. He writhed on the floor, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. His eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. And then, as abruptly as it began, it ended. He lay still, his chest heaving, his body soaked in sweat. Christine collapsed beside him, sobbing uncontrollably. That night after the priest departed, Father Peter confided in me. His voice trembled as he described the scene. "I have prayed with the dying," he said. "I have witnessed suffering that defies words. But never, never have I felt the air thicken with such malice. It was as though the room itself rejected the prayer. The investigators' report to the bishop was swift and unequivocal. They could no longer dismiss the case as mere psychological disturbance. The evidence, they wrote, suggested a genuine possession. And though the church rarely granted exorcisms, the weight of testimony, coupled with the violent manifestations, left little choice. The approval, when it came, was terse but final. Authorization granted for the rite of exorcism. When Father Peter told me this, his face was pale, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. He admitted to me that he had dreaded this moment almost as much as he had prayed for it. Because an exorcism, he said quietly, is not only a battle for the soul of the afflicted, it is a battle for the soul of the priest as well. Christine wept when she heard. Relief mingled with terror. Relief that the church would intervene, terror at the thought of what it would mean. For her husband, for her children, for her home. Michael himself offered no clear reaction. When told, he merely stared at the floor, muttering beneath his breath. I leaned closer, trying to catch his words. What I heard chilled me. 40, he whispered. 40 inside. 1 to stay. When I asked Father Peter later what he thought those words meant, he shook his head. I pray we never find out, he said. But we would. And it would be worse than any of us could have imagined. The decision had been made. An exorcism would take place. I remember the day Father Peter told me. His hands rested on the wooden arms of his chair, but his knuckles were white, strained from how tightly he gripped them. The weight of what lay ahead pressed visibly on him. This was not a matter he had sought. No priest did. The rite was ancient, reserved for only the most extreme cases. It was both shield and weapon, and it carried a warning within itself, that those who wielded it risked being scarred by it. Preparations began quietly. The church did not announce such matters, nor did it wish to involve more witnesses than necessary. The fewer who knew, the better. Too many eyes and the rite risked becoming a spectacle, an event for rumor rather than prayer. Father Peter was appointed the lead, but he would not be alone. Fathers Ashcroft and Doyle would assist, and another, Father Francis McKenna, was called from a neighboring diocese, a man with experience in similar rites. Between them, they formed a small circle of resolve, though I could see in each of their faces the same fear they would never admit aloud. Christine was instructed to remove dangerous objects from the house. Anything sharp, anything that could be turned into a weapon. She obeyed, though with trembling hands. The children were sent to stay with relatives, their departure a silent admission of the danger to come. I was not permitted to be present during the rite itself, but Father Peter allowed me into the periphery. He wanted the case recorded, though not for publicity. He believed there must be an honest account, one not distorted by rumor or myth. If we fail, he told me, people must know how. If we succeed, people must know at what cost. In the days leading to the exorcism, Michael's condition worsened. Christine later told me he hardly ate, and when he did, he vomited soon after. His body grew gaunt, his cheeks hollow. At night he refused to sleep, pacing the hallways, muttering incessantly. She swore she saw him standing by the children's empty beds, whispering words she could not bring herself to repeat. Father Peter visited daily, offering blessings and prayer. Each time, Michael recoiled. The presence of the priest seemed to stir something inside him, as if the thing within recognized the threat. One evening, when Father Peter entered with a small crucifix in hand, Michael's face twisted with such hatred that Christine begged him to leave. He stayed, and Michael's body seized violently. His mouth opened in a roar, not human, not animal, but something that scraped against the nerves of anyone who heard it. Then, as quickly as it came, it ended. Michael slumped into his chair, his eyes glassy. Afterwards, Father Peter confessed to me, "I fear it knows what is coming." The night before the rite, the priests gathered in the rectory. They prayed together for hours, their voices low, their faces set in grim concentration. They spoke of their fears only obliquely, in the language of liturgy, as though to name them openly would give them strength. Christine stayed awake that night as well. She sat by her husband, watching him twist and mutter in his sleep. At times he spoke in his own voice, pleading for help. At other times darker voices slipped out, mocking her, calling her by names she had never heard before. She told Father Peter later that she began to doubt whether the man she married was still inside at all, and yet despite everything, she refused to abandon him. The morning of the exorcism arrived grey and damp, with mist rolling in over the rooftops. Christine described it as a silence heavier than any storm. The priests gathered at the tailor's home, bringing with them what little they could: crucifixes, relics, vials of holy water, the Roman ritual. Michael was restrained, not with force, but with ropes bound loosely to the chair, enough to protect him and those around him. Christine hated the sight of it, but she allowed it. She knew it was necessary. When Father Peter looked at him, he told me later, it was as though Michael had receded entirely. His eyes were vacant, but beneath that vacancy was something else, watching, waiting. The rite would begin that evening, when the house was quiet and the children were safely away. Father Peter had chosen the time carefully, believing the cover of night would shield them from prying eyes, and perhaps in some unspoken way, from the force they were about to confront. As the priests assembled their texts and laid out the ritual items, Christine knelt in the corner, clutching her rosary so tightly it left marks on her hands. And Michael, bound to the chair, suddenly smiled. 40, he whispered again, so faintly that only Father Peter heard. 40 inside. 1 to stay. The words lodged themselves in Peter's mind, repeating long after the whisper ended. For all his preparation, for all his faith, that phrase haunted him. He could not rid himself of the thought that the ritual would not end in deliverance, but in something far worse. When night fell, the exorcism began. The exorcism began in silence. Christine sat in the far corner of the room, the rosary slipping between her fingers, her knuckles bloodless from the pressure of her grip. The priests formed a semicircle around Michael, who sat bound to the wooden chair in the center. A single lamp cast a dim glow over the room, its flickering bulb threatening at every moment to plunge them into darkness. Father Peter opened the ritual. His voice was steady, though he admitted to me later that his hands trembled beneath the sleeves of his cassock. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The others echoed the invocation. The air seemed to change at once. It grew heavier, thicker, as though the very atmosphere resisted the words. Michael's head lolled forward. For a moment it seemed he had fallen asleep, but then his lips parted, and a whisper escaped. Too late. The voice was not his own. It was low, guttural, layered, as though several throats spoke together. Father Peter pressed on, reading the ancient words with unwavering cadence. He sprinkled holy water over Michael, droplets landing on his face and shirt. The reaction was immediate. Michael convulsed, jerking against the ropes with such force that the chair legs scraped across the floor. His mouth opened in a scream that rattled the window glass. Christine buried her face in her hands, but she did not look away. Father Ashcroft stepped forward, holding the crucifix before Michael's eyes. "Leave this servant of God," he commanded. Michael's body stiffened. His eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. From his throat poured a stream of words, rapid, furious, unrecognizable. The priests strained to catch them, but the language shifted too quickly, slipping between guttural consonants and high-pitched wails. At one point, the voice broke into laughter, harsh, mocking, unrelenting. "You are weak," it spat. "All of you. 40 within him, and more waiting." Christine whimpered, clutching her rosary tighter. Father Doyle began the litany of the saints, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each name invoked. The others joined him, their chants filling the small room. Michael thrashed harder, his body bent backward at an unnatural angle, the ropes straining as if they might snap. His jaw opened wider than seemed possible, his teeth bared in a snarl that was not his own. Then, abruptly, he fell limp. His chest heaved, his head hanging forward. For a moment, the room was still. Christine rose halfway to her feet, whispering his name, but Father Peter raised a hand, warning her not to approach. He knew too well the trick of false calm, and he was right. Michael's head snapped upward. His eyes were wide, but what looked through them was not him. His mouth curled into a slow, deliberate smile. "You think you command us," the voice said, calm now, disturbingly so. "But he is ours. He begged for us. And we came." Father Francis, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. His voice cut through the air with sharp authority. "In the name of Christ, I command you to reveal yourselves." The response was chaos. Michael's body jerked violently, his mouth spilling sounds that twisted into words. Names. Dozens of names. Some in languages known, others foreign, lost to time. They came so quickly that the priests could not record them all. Christine sobbed aloud, covering her ears. Father Peter pressed on, his voice louder now, unyielding against the torrent. He commanded them to depart, to release their hold. He spoke with every ounce of strength his faith afforded him. And then Michael began to speak in a child's voice. It was faint, trembling, as though from deep inside. "Please, help me." Christine broke then, rushing forward despite the priest's protests. She knelt before her husband, tears streaming, her hand brushing his face. "I'm here, Michael, I'm here." For an instant, his eyes seemed clear. Recognition flickered there, but before hope could take root, his face twisted again, and the guttural laughter returned. "You cannot have him," the voice mocked. "He belongs to us." Father Peter's voice rose above the din, firm and resolute. "He belongs to God." The struggle stretched on for hours. Sweat soaked the priests' faces, their voices hoarse from relentless prayer. The room itself seemed to pulse with a suffocating energy, as though the very walls strained under the weight of it. And then, without warning, silence fell. Michael slumped against the ropes, his body exhausted, his breathing ragged. The priests exchanged wary glances, unsure if the first round had ended or if another storm lay waiting. Father Peter closed the ritual, his voice raw. "This was only the beginning," he told them. Christine looked at her husband's pale, motionless form. Her tears had not ceased. And as I listened to Father Peter recount that night, I understood his words carried more than weariness. They carried fear, because the demons had not left. They had only been stirred. The hours after that first confrontation were a blur of exhaustion and dread. The priests gathered in the rectory kitchen to regain their strength. Christine sat apart from them, her rosary clutched tight, her eyes fixed on the closed door behind which Michael lay restrained. Father Peter recounted later that silence hung heavy over them, broken only by the clock ticking on the wall. The men avoided one another's eyes, each unwilling to admit the same thought, that the battle had only just begun. Father Doyle finally spoke. 40 demons, it said. His voice was flat, but his hands trembled against the table. "Have you ever heard of such a thing?" No one answered. Christine's voice rose, brittle but unshaken. "I don't care how many there are. You must keep fighting. You must save him." Her plea struck them harder than any demon's threat. She had endured years of Michael's decline, years of fear and shame, yet still she clung to the hope that he could be restored. When they returned to the room, they found Michael awake. His head was bent forward, but his eyes followed them with unnerving precision. He did not speak at first. He only smiled. Father Francis stepped closer. "Who speaks now?" he asked firmly. The reply came in a voice that was high-pitched, mocking, almost playful. "We are many, but one holds the chain. He is stronger than the rest." The priests exchanged glances. This admission was crucial. One spirit ruled the others, binding them together. But to drive out the leader was to provoke the fiercest resistance. Father Peter reopened the ritual, his voice hoarse but determined. He began again from the prayers of deliverance, each word deliberate. The air thickened once more, heavy with unseen resistance. Michael's body trembled. Then, in a sudden burst, he spoke in a torrent of voices, overlapping, discordant. The sound was unbearable, like dozens of throats crying at once. Christine covered her ears, tears spilling down her face. 40, the chorus roared. 40 within him, and one more, waiting. At those words the lamp flickered violently. The room plunged into darkness for several seconds. The smell of sulfur stung their nostrils. Somewhere inside that suffocating black, Michael laughed, a sound that echoed unnaturally, as if from all directions at once. When the light returned, the priest saw his face contorted, lips split in a smile far too wide, blood trickling from his gums. Father Ashcroft pressed the crucifix firmly against Michael's forehead. "You will not remain. By Christ's authority I command you, depart." Michael screamed, the pitch inhuman, his body arching against the ropes. His skin flushed deep red, veins rising as if ready to burst. Christine whispered prayers through sobs, her voice cracking but steady in rhythm. It seemed to give Michael a flicker of resistance. For one brief instant, he cried out in his own voice, raw, desperate, "Help me!" Then it was gone, swallowed in a guttural roar. Father Peter pressed on. His words came faster now, urgent, commanding. "Be gone, unclean spirits! Leave him! You have no claim here!" The struggle dragged deep into the night. The priests alternated prayers, their voices overlapping, forcing strength where their bodies faltered. Each time Michael seemed to weaken, another surge of fury rose within him, as though a new demon came forward to take control. And then came the moment none of them forgot. Michael's head snapped back, his eyes rolling upward. His lips moved slowly, deliberately, forming words that chilled every man present. 40 will go, but 1 will stay. The voice was steady, unbroken, cold with certainty. It was not taunting this time. It was declaring fact. Christine shook her head violently, clutching Michael's bound hands. "No, no, you're lying!" But the silence that followed was worse than any scream. The priests pressed on, refusing to let despair take root. They continued the ritual until Michael collapsed, unconscious, his breathing shallow. They unbound him only enough to lay him on the mattress, afraid to risk more. Christine sat at his side, brushing his hair from his damp forehead, whispering to him as though he were already restored. The priest stepped back into the hall. Their faces were pale, their voices hushed. Father Doyle finally spoke the thought that weighed on all of them. If it is true, if one refuses to leave, then this battle may not end with victory. Father Peter's reply was grim. Then we must find the one, the leader. Until then, we keep fighting. And as he told me this many years later, his eyes filled with something I had not expected, not just sorrow but guilt. Because though they fought through that night and many after, they never did find the one. Not fully. By the next morning, Father Peter admitted he felt older by years. His body was stiff from kneeling, his throat raw from prayers spoken until his voice broke. Yet he knew rest was not an option. Every moment they hesitated was another moment. Michael remained enslaved. Christine looked worse. Her eyes were swollen from weeping, her lips cracked from whispering prayers through the night. She had stayed by Michael's side even when he was unconscious, refusing to let go of his hand, as though her grip alone anchored him to the world of the living. The priests met privately in the rectory parlor after sunrise. Father Ashcroft poured tea with trembling hands, spilling some onto the saucer. None of them drank. Father Doyle spoke first. "We cannot keep driving them out at random. We must identify the one that holds them together. Until then, this will not end." Father Francis agreed, his tone steady, though his eyes betrayed doubt. "He spoke clearly last night. 40 may depart, but 1 will remain. That is not a threat. It is a promise." Father Peter lowered his gaze. "Then we must test them, press for names, force each spirit to reveal itself. Somewhere among them is the leader." Christine entered at that moment, pale but determined. "I will not be kept out of this," she said firmly. "I want to be here when you fight him. I have seen what these things do to my husband. I will not sit quietly in the other room." There was no argument they could give her, and so that afternoon they began again. Michael was bound as before, though with greater care. His wrists bore red marks from the ropes, his skin clammy. At first he appeared dazed, his eyes barely opening as the priests gathered around him. But as soon as Father Peter lifted the crucifix, the change came swift and brutal. Michael's body stiffened, his jaw clenched so tight that his teeth ground audibly. Then came a voice, deep, coarse, and unfamiliar. "You do not command us. You do not know our names." Father Peter pressed forward. "Then speak them. In Christ's name, reveal yourself." There followed an outpouring unlike anything Christine had ever heard. Michael's mouth moved rapidly, spewing names in a torrent. Some were common, some strange, some twisted echoes of biblical figures. They came so fast she could not tell where one ended and another began. Father Doyle scribbled furiously onto paper, his pen scratching to keep pace. But among the stream, one name rose louder, sharper, cutting through the others like a blade. Mariel. The sound of it silenced the room for an instant. Even Michael seemed to shudder as it passed his lips. Father Francis seized the moment. "Mariel, are you the leader?" Michael's eyes rolled back, his voice turning low and guttural. "The others bow to me, but I do not leave," Christine gasped, pressing her rosary to her lips. "What do you want from him?" she demanded through tears. The voice answered calmly, chillingly. "To break him, to leave him hollow. The others amuse themselves, but I remain." Father Ashcroft lifted the ritual again, forcing his shaking hands to steady. He launched into the prayers with renewed vigor, each word directed not at the Legion, but at Mariel. Michael thrashed, the bed frame rattling violently. A foul stench rose in the air, thick and choking. His voice fractured between dozens of tones, but Mariel's remained strongest, woven through them all. The exorcism stretched into the evening. Once, Michael vomited black bile that stained the sheets and filled the room with a metallic stench. Christine retched, but refused to leave his side. At one point, Mariel spoke directly to her. "He called for me. Did you know that? He opened himself and I came." Christine shook her head violently. Lies. But her face betrayed doubt. She remembered those months before the priests arrived. Michael's sleepless nights, his angry outbursts, his strange mutterings in the dark. Had he called something to himself? Father Peter did not let her dwell on it. "Do not listen. It twists the truth. Focus only on the prayers." They pressed until their voices broke again. By the small hours, Michael collapsed once more, drenched in sweat, his breath shallow but steady. Father Doyle whispered the question none of them wanted to speak aloud. "If we drive out the others, but Mariel stays, what then?" Father Peter answered with words that haunted me long after he told me this story. "Then it will not be an exorcism. It will be a compromise." Christine, exhausted but defiant, whispered one word into the silence that followed. No. She would not accept compromise. And as I left the rectory that night, reviewing Father Peter's notes and Christine's trembling testimony, I realized something that unsettled me deeply. This was no longer only about saving Michael Taylor. It was about testing the very limits of what the church could defeat, and Mariel knew it. The next session began with a new strategy. The priests agreed that if Mariel was indeed the chain that held the others together, then perhaps loosening the bonds meant driving out the lesser ones first. It was a method older exorcists sometimes employed, though rarely with success in cases of mass possession. Father Peter recorded in his notes that Michael was eerily calm that morning, as though emptied from the night before. He sat upright on the mattress, still bound, his eyes glassy but his lips twitching with faint mocking smiles. Christine sat close by, whispering quiet prayers into her folded hands, her whole body taut with waiting. Father Francis began. He pressed the crucifix gently against Michael's forehead and intoned the opening prayer of deliverance. The atmosphere shifted at once. Michael's back arched violently, his restraints creaking. A chorus of voices burst from him in protest. "Not today! Not now!" they shrieked. But the priests ignored the cries, focusing on the ritual. Father Ashcroft commanded, "In the name of Christ, reveal yourselves and depart. The light has no place for you." Michael gagged, his throat convulsing. Then one voice rose above the others, shrill and panicked. It gave a name. Aramis. The sound of it seemed to weaken Michael for a moment, as though forcing the name out had cost the spirit something. Father Doyle stepped closer, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Aramis, by Christ's command, leave him." Michael convulsed violently. His body thrashed against the ropes so hard the frame of the bed scraped across the floorboards. Christine sobbed, covering her mouth with her hands. Then in a guttural screech the voice broke. Michael vomited again, this time clear fluid streaming down his chin. For several seconds he slumped, motionless. The priests exchanged cautious glances. Was it gone? But then the laughter came, low, resonant, familiar. Mariel. You cast them like stones into the river, the voice rumbled, steady as iron. But I remain. Each one you drive out only makes me stronger. The priests pressed harder, refusing to yield. Another spirit broke within the hour, naming itself Belthar. This one resisted more, clawing through Michael's throat with a rasping scream that left blood streaking his lips. Christine nearly fainted, and Father Ashcroft had to steady her. When it finally departed, the room fell into silence. For a heartbeat, Michael looked himself again, eyes wide, lips trembling as he whispered his wife's name. Christine reached for him, tears spilling freely, but Mariel returned before her hand could touch him. His smile stretched wide, too wide. He is mine still. Christine collapsed to her knees, sobbing into the mattress. Why won't it leave? Why won't God free him? Father Peter's reply came with no conviction, only weary determination. Because the battle is not yet finished. The priests continued for hours. One by one, the names surfaced, some clear, others muddled, all forced out under relentless prayer. Each time, Michael's body suffered further. His skin tore at the wrists, his lips cracked and bled. His voice dropped into hoarse growls between expulsions, until even breathing seemed to pain him. By nightfall, Father Doyle's notebook contained nearly 40 names. He circled the last 3 with a heavy line, muttering, "We are close." But Mariel made certain they understood the cost. As Michael collapsed once more, the voice whispered through his cracked lips, "You have torn them from me, but I am not bound to go. I will feed on him when all the others are gone, and when he breaks, I will move to you." The lamp in the corner flickered and died, leaving only candlelight trembling against the walls. Christine whispered, barely audible, "You're killing him. You're tearing him apart piece by piece." Father Francis touched her shoulder gently. "It is the only way." But even as he said it, I could hear the tremor in his voice when Father Peter retold this moment to me years later. For though they had weakened the Legion, Mariel seemed not diminished, but intensified, like a black flame rising taller with every lesser fire extinguished. That night, the priests did not speak of victory. They spoke of survival. And Christine, her faith tested beyond breaking, whispered words that chilled even the most steadfast among them. What if this isn't about saving Michael at all? What if this is about showing us there are some battles we were never meant to win? The sessions grew darker with each passing night. The priests had expelled name after name until Father Doyle's notebook read like a grim catalogue of the damned. Yet Michael grew no freer. Instead, he wasted away before their eyes, his cheeks hollowed, his body gaunt, his eyes sunken. Christine sometimes caught herself staring at him in terror, as though she no longer recognized her own husband. It was then that Mariel shifted tactics. On the 3rd night after the expulsions began, as Father Peter read the Gospel of John over Michael's trembling form, the voice cut through in a tone colder than ever before. "You think to bind me with words," it said evenly, "but I know you, each of you, and I will speak what you hide." The priests froze, their eyes darting to one another. Christine gripped the rosary so tightly the beads cut into her palm. The voice laughed low in Michael's chest. Then it turned on Father Doyle. "You drink in secret, priest, wine not for the chalice, nights alone, your shame unspoken. Is this your servant of Christ?" Father Doyle went pale. His lips trembled, but he did not answer. He only pressed his cross harder against Michael's heaving chest. Next it turned on Father Francis. "You doubt. You whisper in the dark that your prayers are wasted breath, that God does not hear you. You wear the collar, but you are hollow." Francis's hand shook so violently the crucifix nearly fell. Christine gasped, covering her mouth, and then Mariel's attention shifted like a blade toward Father Peter. His words were slow, deliberate. "And you fear failure more than sin. You would rather compromise than face the truth, that I am stronger than you, that God has abandoned this man." The air in the room seemed to collapse inward. Even Christine could not speak. Father Peter forced himself forward, though his face was ashen. He pressed the crucifix hard against Michael's brow, so hard the skin whitened beneath it. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Your words are smoke. You will not break us." But Mariel laughed, a sound that rattled the window panes. "I already have." Michael's body convulsed, his head snapping back so violently it struck the wall with a crack. Blood ran from his nose. Christine screamed, trying to reach him, but Father Francis pulled her back. The priests pressed harder into the prayers, speaking over one another, their voices desperate, rising against the storm of taunts. Michael's mouth gaped wide, his throat stretched beyond natural measure as the cacophony of voices returned. But Mariel's tone never wavered, threading through them all with mocking strength. "You have no power here. You are men trembling before shadows." Then, in a voice that mimicked Christine's perfectly, it whispered, "Peter." Father Peter froze. Christine's eyes went wide. She had not spoken. The voice repeated it, soft, taunting. "Peter." The priest's grip faltered. Only Father Ashcroft's sudden barked prayer dragged the ritual forward. The candles shook violently, their flames twisting sideways as though pulled by a sudden draught. At last, Michael collapsed into unconsciousness, his breath ragged, his skin grey. The priest staggered back, drenched in sweat, their faces hollowed by fatigue and shame. Christine knelt beside her husband, clutching his hand, tears streaking her face. "How much more can he take?" she whispered. Father Peter answered with something closer to despair than certainty. "No more than God allows." But as he said it, I could hear, through the way he told me years later, that he no longer believed it fully. Mariel was no longer merely resisting. He was dismantling them, one by one. And though they returned to the ritual again the next night, each man carried with him the words Mariel had spoken. Secrets exposed, doubts unearthed, shame dragged into light. The exorcism was no longer only a battle for Michael Taylor's soul. It had become a war against the very faith of the men trying to save him. And Mariel was winning. The morning after Mariel's taunts, the rectory was suffocatingly silent. The priests gathered in the narrow kitchen, cups of tea cooling untouched before them. No one mentioned what had been spoken during the ritual, but the air was thick with it, the shame, the doubt, the lingering sting of truth too close to deny. Christine broke the silence. Her voice was hoarse from weeping, but steady. "How long will you keep this going? Look at him. He's fading away." Father Francis tried to comfort her, but his words were hollow. "These things take time. Some battles last weeks." Christine's eyes flashed. "Weeks? He doesn't have weeks. His body won't last days." No one disagreed. Michael's skin had taken on a waxy pallor, his breath shallow and uneven. His wrists and ankles were raw from the restraints. At night, Christine heard him whispering in his sleep. Not words, not prayers, but strange guttural sounds that made her blood run cold. By late afternoon, she had reached her breaking point. When Father Peter prepared the room for another round, Christine stepped between him and her husband. Her hands trembled, but her jaw was set. "No more," she said. "I won't let you torture him like this. You've dragged 40 names out of him already. He's weaker every time. What if you're killing him faster than you're saving him?" Father Peter froze. The crucifix in his hand trembled. For a moment he almost looked relieved, as though Christine had voiced the doubt he had carried silently. But Father Doyle intervened, his tone sharp. "If we stop now, it wins. That's what it wants, for us to lose courage, to abandon him. We can't let that happen." Christine's voice broke. "And if you keep going until there's nothing left of him, what then? Will you tell me it was God's will?" Her words echoed in the small room. No one spoke. It might have ended there if not for what happened next. Michael stirred. His eyes snapped open, wide and glistening, pupils dilated until almost black. He spoke in his own voice for the first time in days. "Christine," he rasped, "help me." She fell to her knees beside him, clutching his face in her hands. "I'm here, Michael. I'm here." For a fleeting instant, she saw her husband's gaze, clear, terrified, pleading. Then his body jolted violently, throwing her backward. His mouth opened in a roar not his own. Mariel had returned. "You see," the voice thundered, "he is mine, and you cannot take him." The lamps flickered wildly, glass rattling in their frames. Michael's body strained so hard against the ropes that the wooden bed frame groaned. Father Peter, driven by instinct rather than certainty, launched back into the ritual. His voice was ragged but resolute. "By Christ's authority, you have no dominion here." Michael writhed, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. His jaw unhinged wider than seemed possible, his tongue blackened and swollen. Christine screamed, clawing toward him, but Father Francis restrained her. "Do not go near him." The scene was chaos. Priests shouting prayers over one another, Christine wailing, Michael convulsing violently. And through it all, Mariel's laughter cut through like a blade. "You are wasting yourselves," it hissed. "I will not leave. I was invited. He called me. He belongs to me." Christine froze at those words. Her tears slowed, her face drained of color. "Michael, is that true?" she whispered. But Michael did not answer. Only Mariel spoke now. The priests pressed on until Michael collapsed once more, unconscious, his chest rising and falling with ragged effort. The room stank of sweat, bile, and burnt wax. Christine sat motionless at his side, her rosary dangling loosely from her hand. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know who I'm praying to anymore." Father Peter looked at her then, not with rebuke, but with the same fear she carried. Because though they had held the line, the cost was mounting. Their faith was fraying. Their strength was gone, and Michael's body was failing. Mariel had not only withstood the exorcism, he had begun to turn them against themselves. And Father Peter confessed to me later that it was that night, standing over Michael's unconscious form, that he realized the truth. They were no longer certain this battle could be won. The priests agreed they could not continue in fragments. The sessions had weakened them, spread their strength thin, and given Mariel too many chances to regroup. If there was to be an end, it had to be forced. Father Peter called it plainly. "We attempt the decisive rite tonight. We gather every ounce of faith we have, and we do not stop until he is free, or until Mariel shows us the truth of his power." No one argued. Even Christine, hollow-eyed and trembling, gave a slow nod. She looked at her husband's frail body and whispered, "Then let it end." That night, the room was prepared with greater care than before. Candles lined the walls, their flames steady in the still air. Bowls of holy water stood ready, rosaries draped across the chairs. The ritual sat open on the small table beside the bed, its pages worn and smudged with oil from constant handling. Michael was carried to the mattress, his body limp, his breath shallow. His skin had grown ashen, his lips cracked and dry. At times he seemed scarcely alive. Christine sat beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead, whispering prayers not from the book but from memory. Childhood hymns, fragments of scripture, desperate words she strung together in hope that something might pierce the darkness. The priests began with the litany of the saints. Their voices rose together, solemn and unwavering, filling the room with a resonance that seemed, for the first time, to push against the oppressive weight that lingered there. At first, nothing happened. Michael lay still, his chest barely moving. Christine almost believed, for a fleeting second, that perhaps the worst had passed, that Mariel had retreated in silence. Then Michael's eyes opened. They were black, the pupils swallowing the iris, reflecting only candlelight. His lips curled back, baring teeth bloodied from biting into his own cheek. The laughter that followed was louder than any they had heard. It reverberated in the wooden walls, in the very floor beneath their feet. "You think tonight is different?" Mariel roared through Michael's throat. You think your broken faith can stand against me? Then come, strike your prayers upon me, and see who breaks first." The priests pressed on, their words louder, faster, their crucifixes pressed against Michael's writhing body. The ropes strained, wood splintering under the violent convulsions. Suddenly the room plunged into chaos. The candles erupted with a hiss, their flames shooting high before snuffing out, plunging them into near darkness. A gust of air tore through the room, though the windows were closed. Christine screamed, clutching her rosary so hard it snapped, beads scattering across the floor. Michael's body arched unnaturally, bones cracking audibly as his back lifted from the bed. His mouth stretched wider, a guttural growl pouring out that shook the very glass in the frames. Father Ashcroft flung holy water across the room, droplets striking Michael's skin with a sizzle that filled the air with acrid smoke. He shrieked, the voice layered, dozens of tones screaming at once, but Mariel's cut sharpest. "You are wasting him. Every word weakens his flesh. Soon he will be a shell and I will walk free." Christine collapsed to her knees, crying out, "Take me instead, leave him." For the first time, Mariel paused. Michael's head turned sharply toward her, his lips twitching into a grin. "You would trade yourself?" the voice asked, almost curious. Father Peter's voice thundered in reply. "Ignore it. Do not listen." But the seed had been planted. Christine wept openly, clutching Michael's trembling hand, whispering, "I would give anything to have him back." The priests pressed on relentlessly, their prayers rising in defiance. Their voices cracked, their bodies shook, but they did not falter. Michael screamed again, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. His chest heaved, his body shuddering violently. One by one, the last of the lesser voices shrieked their departure, fading, weakening, dissipating under the onslaught. At last, silence. Michael collapsed, limp, sweat soaking the sheets. His chest rose and fell faintly. Christine sobbed in relief, clutching him tightly. But the priests did not celebrate. They stood in silence, waiting. And then, softly, almost tenderly, Michael's lips moved. "I told you," Mariel whispered. 40 will go, but 1 will stay." The candle flames flickered back to life on their own, dim and wavering. The smell of sulfur filled the room. Father Peter sank to his knees, his crucifix still pressed tightly in his hand, his face hollowed with despair. Because now they knew, every spirit was gone, except the one that mattered. The silence after Mariel's words was more terrifying than any scream. It pressed against their ears, suffocating in its weight. Christine clung to Michael, rocking him gently as if he were a child, whispering his name over and over. But the priests knew what she could not yet admit. Michael was not Michael anymore. Father Peter rose slowly, his crucifix trembling in his hand. "He is still here. The others are gone, but the strongest has taken root." Father Ashcroft's voice shook. "If Mariel alone remains, then every moment we wait gives him deeper claim. The soul is weak, the body weaker. If he takes both..." He trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Christine looked up at them, eyes red, face streaked with tears. "You said the right would end it. You promised me." "No," Peter corrected softly. "We said we would fight to the end." His gaze hardened. "And the end has not yet come." Michael stirred on the mattress. His lips moved, whispering words too faint to hear. Christine leaned closer, desperate for some sign of him, and for the briefest second, his voice sounded like his own. "Christine, help me!" Her heart leapt. She grasped his face with both hands, pressing her forehead against his. "I'm here, Michael. I'll never leave you. Hold on." But then the smile returned, wide and cruel, twisting his features into something inhuman. His voice deepened, layered once more. "And that," Mariel hissed, "is why he will never be free. Because you will always listen." Christine recoiled, a choked sob escaping her. Father Ashcroft stepped forward, fury sharpening his voice. "You are a liar, spirit, a parasite. By Christ's authority I command you, leave him now." He pressed the crucifix to Michael's chest. Michael's body convulsed violently, but instead of recoiling, he lunged forward, snapping his teeth, nearly striking Ashcroft's hand. A growl rumbled from his throat, so deep it rattled the boards beneath them. Then came the words, Latin, but twisted, corrupted, a perversion of prayer spat back at them with venom. The priests recognized fragments of scripture, inverted and defiled, spoken with such clarity it chilled their blood. Father Peter staggered back, his face pale. He is no longer resisting. He is cooperating. Ashcroft turned to him. Meaning? Meaning Michael has given permission. The word struck Christine like a blow. She clutched her chest, shaking her head violently. No, no, he would never. But deep down, even she remembered. The night Michael had confessed feeling something inside that brought him a strange peace. The way his anger and despair had turned to apathy, almost comfort. Had Mariel offered him rest when nothing else could? Michael's eyes fluttered open again, this time calm, disturbingly calm. He looked around the room, his voice measured and almost gentle. Why do you fight? I am not your enemy. I have lifted his burdens. I have silenced his pain. I am the voice that speaks when God does not answer. The priests resumed their prayers, louder now, desperate to drown him out. But Mariel's words slithered through their chants, weaving doubt, piercing faith. Ashcroft shouted over him, reciting the rite with renewed force, but Michael's mouth twisted into a smirk. You tire yourselves with words. Shall I tell you what happened in 1900 when your brothers tried the same? They prayed until their tongues bled, and I watched as their faith broke, one by one. I do not leave. I never leave. The room shook faintly, the walls creaking, as though the house itself strained under his presence. Christine dropped to her knees, clutching at Father Peter's robes. Tell me what to do, please. Tell me how to save him. Peter's face was grey with exhaustion. He knew the truth. The prayers were failing. The traditional rite had driven out the weak, but Mariel remained, too deeply rooted, too bound to Michael's will. Ashcroft's voice cut through the rising despair. If the man wills the spirit, then prayers cannot sever them. His jaw clenched. We would have to force the body to reject the soul's destruction, but that means risking the man's life. Christine froze, staring at them both. No, you can't. You promised me you'd bring him back. Peter placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but trembling. We promised to fight. Sometimes the only way to save what remains of a soul is to free it from its prison. Her scream tore through the room. No, you're talking about killing him. Before either priest could answer, Michael sat upright without warning, ropes tearing free as though they were paper. His head tilted back, eyes blazing black, voice booming with triumph. Yes, Mariel cried. Kill him! Strike him down in your holy righteousness, and watch his soul fall into my hands. Either way, he is mine. The priests staggered back, crucifixes raised, but doubt had crept into their hearts. Christine collapsed against Michael's body, holding him tightly, as if her grip alone could shield him. And in that moment, Mariel laughed again, because he knew the priests were trapped. If they let Michael live, the demon remained. If they forced him free, Michael's soul could be lost forever. And either way, Mariel would not go quietly. Christine would not release him. Her body was draped across Michael's chest, her fingers digging into his torn shirt, her sobs muffled against his fevered skin. Every attempt from the priests to pull her away ended in her cries growing louder. You'll have to kill me first, she spat, her face streaked with tears and sweat. I won't let you touch him again. Not like this. Father Peter stood over her, his crucifix heavy in his hand, though he had never felt more powerless. Father Ashcroft's gaze flicked toward him, eyes wild, desperate for direction. But no words came. Michael lay unnaturally still beneath Christine's trembling form. His chest rose and fell in shallow, measured breaths. At first it seemed a reprieve, a fragile silence after the storm, but then came the sound. A low, guttural vibration. It wasn't breath. It wasn't a voice. It was resonance, like the hum of a great machine buried beneath the earth. The walls quivered. Dust fell from the beams above. Christine felt it too. Her body stiffened against Michael's chest. She raised her head slowly, trembling. His mouth was open, lips slack, throat vibrating with the sound, though no air seemed to move. And then his eyes opened. They were no longer his eyes at all. Two black mirrors reflecting nothing, swallowing light. Christine staggered back, clutching her rosary. The hum deepened into a growl, then into words that shook the floorboards. "You see," Mariel thundered, Michael's body arching unnaturally. "He has given me flesh. No longer am I shadow. I walk in him now." His arms twisted against the ropes, muscles bulging with unnatural force. The hemp burned against his skin but did not restrain him for long. His legs convulsed, kicking wildly, the bed frame splintering beneath him. The priests pressed forward, voices rising in unison as they resumed the rite. But Mariel only laughed, a sound that seemed to reverberate from the very bones of the house. "Pray louder," he mocked. "Let the world hear your failure." Suddenly, Michael's body snapped upright, the ropes tearing loose entirely. He stood barefoot on the wooden floor, posture grotesquely rigid. Christine screamed as he turned toward her, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. For a moment, she saw her husband's face softened by recognition. "Christine," he whispered, voice weak and fragile. She reached out, sobbing. "I'm here, Michael. Fight it, please." But before she could touch him, his head jerked violently to one side, a snarl ripping from his throat. He lunged, knocking her back into the wall with such force the rosary scattered from her hands. The priests reacted instantly, forcing themselves between Christine and the thing her husband had become. Ashcroft shoved his crucifix toward Michael's chest, shouting the command, "Begone, deceiver! You have no dominion!" Michael's hands shot up, seizing the crucifix. For an instant, smoke hissed from his palms as flesh blistered. But instead of recoiling, he laughed, his grip crushing the metal, bending it slightly before flinging it aside. Ashcroft staggered back in horror. "Dear God!" Peter pressed forward, voice raw with urgency. "Michael Taylor, you are still within this body. In Christ's name, reject this spirit. Reject him now." For a heartbeat, Michael faltered. His lips trembled. His blackened eyes flickered with a glimmer of something human. Christine crawled forward, tears streaking her face. "Michael, please, it's me. I'm here. I love you. Come back to me." And then Mariel spoke again, his voice layered and mocking. "Your love is the chain that binds him to me. Do you not see? It was your prayers that brought me, your desperation that opened him. You begged for help when God was silent, and I answered." Christine froze, horror dawning. "No." Peter's voice shook. "Do not listen. Those are lies." But Mariel leaned closer, Michael's lips curling into a sneer. "Ask her what she prayed for. Ask her whose name she cried in the dark when her husband's mind was breaking." Christine's sobs grew louder, her body collapsing in on itself. She could not deny it. She had prayed for anything, anyone, to relieve Michael's torment when doctors had failed, when priests delayed, when God seemed distant. And something had answered. Michael convulsed again, body jerking violently, his face contorted between agony and ecstasy, a grotesque war playing out across his features. His screams shifted, sometimes his own, sometimes Mariel's, sometimes both overlapping. The room shook harder, plaster cracking overhead, a lamp crashing to the floor. The priests shouted louder, their voices nearly drowned by the chaos. Finally, with a deafening crack, Michael's body hurled itself against the wall, sliding down to the floor in a heap. He lay motionless, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Christine rushed to him, but Peter pulled her back. "Not yet," he barked. They watched in terror as Michael's chest rose once more. Slowly, unnaturally, he sat up, his head tilted sideways at an impossible angle, eyes still black as pitch. And when he spoke, it was no longer with Mariel's voice alone. It was Michael and Mariel together. "We are one." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "We are one." For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was worse than the chaos that had come before. Michael's body sat slumped against the wall, head cocked grotesquely, those blackened eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. Christine's sobs filled the room, sharp and broken, as she reached toward him, but Father Peter restrained her with both arms. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not now." Father Ashcroft's face had gone ashen. "It's not merely possession anymore," he said, voice cracking. "It's habitation. The man and the spirit, bound together." Christine twisted in Peter's grip, her eyes wild. "Then stop it. Do something." But what could they do? The rite was weakening. The demon was no longer resisting, it was feeding. Every prayer, every drop of faith poured into Michael seemed to fuel Mariel's hold. And still, Michael's own voice lingered beneath the growl, not erased but interwoven. "I am tired," he whispered. Then, overlapping in that same breath, Mariel sneered, "I am eternal." The priests exchanged a look that needed no words. They had reached the breaking point. Ashcroft fetched a small wooden box from his satchel, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside lay a relic, a fragment of bone wrapped in linen and sealed in wax. "This was kept from 1867, he explained, his voice low. "From one who died resisting such darkness. If this doesn't sever the bond, nothing will." Christine recoiled. "You're treating him like an experiment. He's my husband, not some vessel you can tear apart." Peter's voice broke as he answered her. "If we fail here, Christine, then you lose him entirely. We cannot stop, not now." Michael stirred again, rising slowly to his feet. His movements were stiff, puppet-like, his head still tilted unnaturally. The lamplight caught his face, and for an instant it looked hollow, like something was stretching his skin from the inside. He smiled. "Bring your bones. Bring your crosses. Bring your dead saints. I have tasted him. He invited me. And I will not leave." Ashcroft advanced, pressing the relic against Michael's forehead. Instantly, a shriek ripped through the room, half human, half something else, layered and distorted. Michael's knees buckled, his body thrashing violently. Smoke curled from his skin where the relic touched. "Hold him!" Peter cried. Christine screamed as the priests forced Michael down onto the floorboards, pinning his flailing arms and legs. His body convulsed with unnatural strength, striking out with enough force to splinter wood. His mouth foamed, his teeth snapping at the air. Ashcroft pressed harder with the relic, shouting the invocation through clenched teeth. Michael howled, the black in his eyes swirling violently, as though something was shifting beneath the surface. Then, for a single heartbeat, Michael's voice broke through, clear and anguished. "Christine, help me! Please, don't let them!" The plea cut short, replaced instantly with Marielle's laughter, guttural and thunderous. "He begs you to save him, but you know what that means. To save him is to keep me. To lose me is to lose him. Which will you choose, little wife?" Christine fell to the floor beside him, her hands trembling over his chest. "Michael, I don't know what to do." His eyes flickered, black giving way to brown, then back again. His face twisted between torment and serenity. "You prayed for me," Mariel hissed through his lips. "You asked for relief. I answered. You made me welcome." Her sobs shook her whole body. I didn't know what I was asking for." Michael's body bucked violently, nearly throwing Ashcroft aside. Peter slammed his palm against Michael's forehead, forcing the crucifix there. His voice was raw, breaking with desperation. "You are not welcome here. By the blood of Christ, depart." For the first time, Mariel screamed, not laughter, but rage. The air thickened, heavy as lead. The floorboards cracked beneath Michael's twisting form. Every candle extinguished at once, plunging the room into darkness. Christine shrieked. The only light came from the faint glow of the relic pressed to Michael's skin and the unholy shimmer in his blackened eyes. And in that darkness, Mariel's voice filled every corner. "You cannot cast me out. I am bound. I will leave when I am finished, and not before." The priests shouted louder, their voices trembling but unbroken. But Christine had begun to pray too, not to cast the demon out, not for strength, but for mercy, for Michael's suffering to end. And it was that prayer, Peter told me years later, that nearly broke them. Because mercy, in this case, could mean only one thing. The air inside the room was unbearable, thick as smoke, though no fire burned. The relic still glowed faintly against Michael's forehead, but its light seemed to fade each time Mariel laughed. Christine's voice wavered, her whispered prayers spilling out, But they were not words of defiance anymore. They were words of surrender. "Lord, have mercy. Please, just let him rest." Father Peter's heart clenched. He knew what she meant. He had seen it before, whispered at deathbeds, murmured at the edge of madness. The prayer for release was not for healing. It was for finality. Ashcroft's voice broke over the right. His strength was gone, his face drawn and grey. He will not leave. He feeds on her faith, her grief, her guilt. Every word, every plea, he turns it to his advantage. Michael's body convulsed beneath them, but it was different now, less violent, more deliberate. He sat up, his spine arching until his chest thrust forward unnaturally. His mouth spread into a smile that was almost serene. "Do you see?" Marielle purred. "Even now, she prays for the end. I am the answer. Always the answer." Christine pressed her hands to her ears, rocking back and forth as if to block the voice, but it was no use. His words crawled beneath the skin, seeding doubt and despair. Peter grasped her shoulders, shaking her. "Christine, listen to me. He lies. Your husband is still here. He can still be saved." Her eyes met his, wide and drowning in tears. "And what if saving him means killing him? What if the only way to free him is to let him go?" The question pierced the priests like a blade. For a long, terrible moment, neither answered. Ashcroft was the first to break. "If the soul is bound, then severing the body may free it. But," he faltered, voice low, "there are no assurances. We might kill the man and lose the soul." Peter's face twisted in anguish. "And if we do nothing, the soul will rot in this corruption." Christine's scream cut through them. "Stop talking like he's not here. He's right there. Michael, say something. Please, say something." For a moment, the blackness in Michael's eyes wavered. His lips trembled. His voice came, frail, broken, almost drowned. "Christine, I'm so tired." Her sobs broke anew. She clutched his hand, pressing it against her cheek. "Then rest, love, just rest." And in that moment, Mariel's laughter thundered, filling every inch of the house. "Yes, let him rest in me." The floorboards split with a loud crack, the walls groaning as if the very structure would collapse under the weight of his presence. The air was charged, prickling against their skin, the candles reigniting of their own accord in sputtering bursts. Ashcroft turned to Peter, his face pale and lined with terror. "We must decide now. If we hesitate any longer, he will take control entirely. There will be no man left to save." Peter closed his eyes, clutching his crucifix so tightly his knuckles whitened. His mind raced with prayers, but none offered certainty. Every choice before them carried damnation. Christine, still clinging to her husband, lifted her face, streaked with tears. "If you do this, if you take him from me, then you'll answer to God for it." Michael's chest heaved. His voice came again, layered, a grotesque fusion of man and spirit. "Do it, priests. Strike. Spill his blood. Either way, he is mine." And for the first time since the rite began, Father Peter felt his own faith falter, because he realized Mariel was right. Every path led into darkness. The question was not whether Michael could be saved. It was whether anyone in that room would leave with their soul intact. The room was collapsing into chaos. The cracked beams above groaned, dust raining from the ceiling. The floorboards quivered under Michael's body, which sat rigid against the wall, head tilted, lips stretched in a smile that was both his and not his. Christine clung to him desperately, her face buried in his chest. Her prayers had turned into incoherent sobs. The priests had no more time. Father Peter looked at Ashcroft, and in that glance, the decision was made. There was no path left without ruin. One way risked the body, the other risked the soul. And silence. Silence meant surrendering both. "Hold him," Peter commanded. His voice cracked, but it carried authority born of despair. Ashcroft and Peter pressed forward, forcing Michael flat against the floorboards as his body thrashed with unnatural force. Christine screamed, fighting to pull him free, but Peter restrained her with a single hand, whispering through gritted teeth, Pray for his soul, nothing else, pray only for that." He raised the relic once more, pressing it against Michael's chest. Ashcroft pressed the crucifix to his forehead, their voices rising together. The words of the rite spilled from them like a final charge into battle. Michael's body convulsed violently, the blackness in his eyes swirling as though a storm raged within. His mouth opened wide, and a roar tore out of him, part human agony, part something unearthly, guttural and ancient. "Fools," Mariel thundered. "If you cast me out, you cast him out too. If you destroy me, you destroy what remains of him. I will not leave alone." Christine sobbed harder, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads snapped. Her hands bled, but she did not feel it. Her voice rose with theirs, trembling and broken. "Lord, have mercy. Lord, receive him." For a moment, Michael's voice pierced the roar, sharp and terrified. "Christine, don't let me go." She screamed his name, but then the sound was drowned, smothered by Mariel's mocking laughter. The relic glowed brighter, heat radiating off it, as if it were burning from within. Smoke rose from Michael's chest, the stench of singed flesh filling the room. His back arched violently, head slamming against the floor with sickening force. And then, silence. Utter silence. Michael's body collapsed, limp and lifeless. His eyes closed. The blackness was gone. Christine fell upon him, her cries wrenching, primal. She shook him violently, begged him to breathe, pressed her face against his lips to feel any sign of life. But there was nothing. Peter and Ashcroft knelt back, crucifixes still clutched in trembling hands, their voices hollow, stunned. Had they freed him or damned him? Christine's screams filled the rectory, carrying into the night. And then, a whisper. So faint, so fleeting, Peter almost believed it was the echo of his guilt. But he swore he heard it, carried on the stale air, curling from Michael's lips, though his chest did not rise. I stayed. Christine froze. Her sobs stopped instantly. Her head lifted slowly, her eyes wide with horror. Peter leaned forward, hand shaking, pressing 2 fingers to Michael's throat. No pulse, no breath. The body was dead. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, not Michael's voice at all. I stayed. The lamps flickered violently. A coldness swept through the room, sharper than before, heavier than grief. Ashcroft stumbled back, crossing himself with trembling hands. Dear God, it was not driven out. Christine wailed, her scream splitting the silence. She collapsed against her husband's corpse, clawing at his face, begging him to return. And Peter. Peter stood frozen, crucifix trembling in his hand, knowing the truth that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They had cast out 40, but one remained, and that one had nowhere left to hide, except in the silence of a dead man's body. The case ended there, but not the story. The body was taken, buried under hurried rites. The church claimed victory in private, though no proclamation was ever made. The records are scarce, as if the event was smothered deliberately. But Father Peter confided to me, his voice ragged, his eyes hollow long after the fact. Sometimes at night I still hear it. Not in dreams, not in my mind, in the silence. A whisper at the edge of the room. The same words, always the same. I stayed. And that was the end of Michael Taylor. Or perhaps only the beginning. I closed my notebook slowly after Father Peter's final words, the candle between us burning low. He would not look at me again. His hands trembled on the wooden table, the veins bulging blue, as if the very act of remembering had reopened wounds that had never healed. The church never spoke of Michael Taylor again. Official records of the case are buried, fragmented, scattered across diocesan archives in ways that make them nearly impossible to follow. What little remains is contradictory. One version claims the exorcism was successful, another notes his sudden death by natural causes. None mention Christine's testimony, none record the whispers, but the dates line up. The night of the exorcism in 1974, the hurried burial in the weeks that followed, the absence of any conclusive autopsy report. I tried to ask Father Peter one final question before leaving, why he had agreed to tell me this at all after so many years of silence. He didn't answer directly. He only looked past me toward the chapel door and muttered, "Because silence never keeps them away." His words have lingered with me since. For weeks after the interview, I played back my recordings, convinced the static wasn't static at all. Once or twice I thought I heard it, a faint voice threading between the priest's chants, a whisper too low to belong to any of them. The same phrase he claimed to hear. I stayed. Was it an echo buried in the tape, or something else that refused to be archived, refused to be forgotten? I don't know. What I do know is this. When you stare too long into the silences of old cases, something sometimes stares back. And perhaps in the quiet between words, Michael Taylor still waits. Not living, not gone, just waiting.